decade and a half ago, Labour Prime Minister Kevin Rudd famously declared that climate change was the greatest moral challenge of our generation. It was the start of a boom for wind and solar investment in Australia, driven by a 20% renewable energy target and the subsidies that came attached with that. As you can see from this graph, the generation of wind and solar in Australia doubled between 2007 and 2013. That's the capacity, I should say. You can see it rapidly increasing year by year in the blue columns. The promise that was that renewable energy would not just be cleaner, but cheaper. Our experience was very much the opposite. The red line here shows the retail price of electricity. Between 1980 and 2007, that's before we really started to introduce a lot of renewable energy, the rise in electricity prices was less than CPI, meaning it became cheaper in real terms. From 2008, the price begins to rise steeply, faster than general inflation. The retail cost of electricity doubled in the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd years, according to this data, which comes from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, so we assume it's pretty reliable. Well, now we have a government that wants to introduce even more wind and solar into the system at a faster rate than ever. Energy Minister Chris Bowen says we'll need to install 22,000 solar panels a day, every day for the next 8 years. Yes, that's 22,000 every day for the next 8 years. You didn't hear me wrong. He also says we'll need to install 47 megawatt wind turbines a month, each one higher than the Sydney Harbour Bridge. And we need to install 28,000 kilometres of new wiring to wire it all together. The result, he says, will be cheaper energy. Well, my next guest is well qualified to test that proposition. Adrian Paterson is a South African-born scientist and engineer. He earned a Bachelor of Degree in Science and Chemistry and a PhD in Engineering at the University of Cape Town. He emigrated to Australia in 2008 and was appointed Chief Executive Officer at Australia's Nuclear Science and Technology Organisation, known as ANSTO, in March 2009. That year, he was named a Fellow of the Australian Academy of Technology, Science and Engineering, and he was awarded in 2012 Professional Engineer of the Year by the Sydney Division of Engineers Australia. Aid, thank you for taking the time to join me today. Back in 2007, as I've just said, Kevin Rudd described climate change as the greatest moral challenge of our generation. He also said it was an economic challenge, an environmental challenge, a social challenge and a national security challenge. But there was no suggestion whatsoever that it might also be an engineering challenge. Have we underestimated the extent of what's involved in this so-called transformation from hydrocarbon-based economy to low emissions-based economy?
I think we're underestimating it pretty significantly, because the route we are choosing is to use intermittent renewables. By intermittent, I mean you cannot predict when they are going to provide their electricity. And because they are only available for a tiny fraction of the time that they should be available, you have a problem if you have a grid that is trying to give electrons to our population. And I'm thinking of people in their homes, I'm thinking of businesses and factories. I'm thinking of people who might be charging cars in the future. To have those electrons always on is not going to be solved by having intermittent resources as the typical source of power on our grid. It's simply not going to work.